The five-star restaurant gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Mocking laughter echoed across the banquet table. A young woman in an elegant evening gown hung her head low, trembling hands clasped together. A man in a simple work shirt, calloused hands weathered by labor, calmly placed a glass of water on the polished table. He looked up, his voice deep and steady, yet commanding. "She's with me." The entire table froze. At the head of the table sat a young woman with softly curled hair and ice-cold eyes, motionless. The silver necklace gleaming on her chest trembled slightly with her rapid breathing. It was the moment that brought the entire room to a standstill. On 12 hours earlier, Mark Hale stood in his modest apartment kitchen, making breakfast for his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. At 35, his hands told the story of a working man, calloused from years of fixing air conditioners and refrigeration units. The morning sun filtered through their small window, illuminating a simple life built on love and hard work. "Daddy, look!" Emma held up her latest crayon drawing, a rainbow arching over 3 stick figures holding hands. "It's our family under the rainbow. See? You, me, and..." She paused, pointing to the third figure. "Someone who makes you smile." Mark chuckled, ruffling her hair. "You never stop dreaming, do you?" "Daddy's never alone," Emma declared, with the confidence only children possess. "I'm always with you." In his shirt pocket, Mark kept a small leather notebook. Inside, on the first page, was a signature he treasured. "To Mark Hale, the man I owe my life to." Watch him. It was signed by his old friend, a man whose sacrifice had changed everything. Across the city, Sophia Lane sat in her glass-walled office on the 42nd floor. At 27, she was the youngest billionaire heiress to ever run Lane Enterprises. Her ice-blue eyes scanned contracts with mechanical precision. Tonight's dinner would seal the biggest international deal in company history. Her assistant knocked. "Miss Lane, the Grandview restaurant is ready for tonight's banquet." Sophia touched the silver necklace at her throat, her most treasured possession, though she rarely remembered why. Make sure everything is perfect. That afternoon, Mark received an emergency call. The air conditioning system at the Grandview restaurant had failed just hours before their biggest event of the year. "Come on, Emma," he said, grabbing his toolbox. "Daddy has to save someone's dinner party." The Grandview restaurant buzzed with preparation. Crystal glasses caught the light, and servers polished silverware to perfection. Mark worked quietly in the corner, tools spread around him as Emma sat nearby, coloring in her notebook. As they walked through the dining area, a group of wealthy patrons had arrived early for cocktails. One man in an expensive suit looked up from his drink. "Excuse me," he called out loudly. "I think you're sitting in the wrong section." The table erupted in laughter. Mark kept walking, but Emma stopped. "Daddy, they're wrong," she said, her small voice carrying across the room. "It's okay, sweetheart," Mark whispered, gently taking her hand. The man persisted, his voice dripping with amusement. "This is a 5-star establishment. I'm sure there's a McDonald's down the street that would be more appropriate." More laughter rippled through the room. Mark's jaw tightened slightly, but he continued toward the kitchen area. As they passed the main dining room, a young woman in a modest dress stumbled as a server accidentally bumped into her, spilling red wine across her outfit. The same group of patrons watched as she frantically tried to clean the stain. "How embarrassing," one woman commented loudly. "Someone like that doesn't belong at a table like this anyway." The young woman's face flushed red with humiliation as cruel laughter filled the air. Mark paused, his eyes flashing with something cold and sharp. For just a moment, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. But he said nothing, simply continued on his way. Emma tugged his shirt. "Daddy, why are they being mean?" "Some people forget what really matters," Mark replied softly, his hand instinctively touching the small notebook in his pocket. "Hold on. Let us know. From which city are you watching? It's amazing to see how far stories like this can spread. Subscribe if you want to see the twist unfold with us. And now, back to the table where everything changed. 8 hours later, the Grandview restaurant transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and power. The same dining room where Mark had been mocked now hosted the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across tables adorned with the finest china and sterling silver. Sophia Lane entered like winter itself, elegant, untouchable, and commanding immediate attention. Her midnight blue evening gown flowed behind her as she took her seat at the head of the main table. The silver necklace at her throat caught the light with each breath. Around the table sat international business partners, each representing billions in potential contracts. At Sophia's right hand, her assistant, the same young woman who had been humiliated earlier, now sat trembling in a borrowed dress, still bearing faint wine stains despite her best efforts to clean them. Ladies and gentlemen, Sophia's voice cut through the ambient chatter. Tonight we celebrate the future of global commerce. The table erupted in polite applause. Wine glasses clinked and conversations flowed in multiple languages. Everything seemed perfect until Marcus Blackwell, a prominent investor from London, noticed Sophia's assistant. I say, Marcus announced loudly, his British accent dripping with condescension. I do hope we're not expecting everyone at this table to maintain the same standards of presentation. Eyes turned toward the assistant, whose face immediately flushed crimson. She instinctively pulled at her dress, trying to hide the faint stains. Some people, chimed in Victoria Chen, a steel magnate from Singapore, simply weren't born for tables like this. Her laughter was sharp as broken glass. The assistant's hands began to shake. She started to rise from her chair, whispering, I should go. Nonsense, Marcus continued, emboldened by the crowd's reaction. But perhaps in the future, we should establish a dress code. Can't have people in, what is that, a thrift store special? The table exploded in cruel laughter. Several phones appeared, ready to capture the humiliation for social media. The assistant's breathing became rapid and shallow, tears forming in her eyes. Sophia watched silently, her expression unreadable. That's when the air in the room shifted. Mark Hale appeared beside the table, as if materializing from shadows. He moved with quiet confidence, his work boots silent on the marble floor. In his calloused hand, he carried a simple glass of water. Without asking permission, without acknowledging the shocked faces around him, Mark calmly placed the glass of water in front of the trembling assistant. The laughter died instantly. Marcus Blackwell's face turned red with indignation. Excuse me, but this is a private dinner. I don't know who you think you are, but... Mark looked up, his dark eyes meeting Marcus's with steady calm. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. She's with me. Shridinam. 3 simple words, spoken with such quiet authority that they seemed to reverberate off the walls. The entire table froze. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the servers standing against the wall seemed to hold their breath. Marcus sputtered, his face cycling through shades of purple. This is outrageous. Do you have any idea who we are? Security. But Mark didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply stood there, one hand resting gently on the back of the assistant's chair, his presence somehow filling the entire room. Sophia sat perfectly still at the head of the table, but something had changed in her ice-blue eyes. They were fixed on Mark's face with an intensity that bordered on recognition. Her fingers unconsciously moved to her silver necklace, tracing its familiar weight. You can't just walk in here, Victoria Chen snapped, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. This is a business dinner for serious people. Here, Mark's gaze shifted to her, and she actually leaned back in her chair. I am serious, he said quietly. More serious than you know. The assistant looked up at Mark with wonder and gratitude, but he kept his eyes on the table of powerful people who suddenly seemed much smaller. Marcus stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I demand to know who you think you are. What gives you the right to interrupt our dinner? For the first time, Mark smiled, but it wasn't a warm expression. I'm someone who keeps his promises, someone who understands what real worth looks like. Sophia's breathing became shallow. There was something about his voice, something familiar that sent chills down her spine. The way he stood, the quiet confidence, the protective stance, it stirred memories she thought she had buried. This is absurd, Marcus declared, but his voice cracked slightly. I'm calling the police. Go ahead, Mark replied calmly. But first, you might want to ask your host who she thinks belongs at this table. All eyes turned to Sophia. She sat frozen, her pale fingers now gripping her necklace so tightly her knuckles were white. Her mind raced through fragments of memory. A younger voice, a protective presence, someone who had once stood between her and danger just like this. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Phone cameras captured every second of the standoff. The assistant had stopped crying and now looked between Mark and Sophia with growing amazement. Finally, Marcus broke the silence with a nervous laugh. Well, this is the most ridiculous. Enough! Sophia's voice cut through his bluster like a blade. Everyone turned to her. She was still staring at Mark, her eyes wide with something between shock and recognition. I think, she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, we need to pause this dinner. And if you heard someone say she's with me in that moment, would you trust or doubt him? Comment trust or doubt. The silence in the dining room was deafening. Sophia's request to pause the dinner hung in the air like a challenge. Every eye was fixed on the young billionaire heiress as she slowly rose from her chair, her silver necklace catching the chandelier light. Everyone, please! Sophia's voice was steady but strained. I need a moment to address something important. Marcus Blackwell's face was red with indignation. Sophia, surely you're not going to let this maintenance worker disrupt our... Mr. Blackwell, Sophia cut him off, her ice blue eyes never leaving Mark's face. I suggest you sit down. The authority in her voice was absolute. Marcus reluctantly took his seat, muttering under his breath about proper protocol and security breaches. Mark stood perfectly still beside the assistant's chair, his weathered hands relaxed at his sides. But there was something in his posture, a quiet strength that seemed to fill the entire room. He watched Sophia with patient eyes, as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. Sir, Sophia addressed him directly for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. Would you mind telling me your name? Mark Hale, he replied simply. The name hit Sophia like a physical blow. Her hand flew to her necklace, gripping it so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Several guests noticed her reaction and leaned forward with curiosity. Mark Hale, she repeated, testing the name on her lips like a prayer she had forgotten how to say. Slowly, deliberately, Mark reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew a small, worn leather notebook. The sight of it made Sophia's breathing catch in her throat. I believe, Mark said quietly, this might mean something to you. He opened the notebook to the first page and held it up for her to see. Even from across the table, Sophia could make out the familiar handwriting that had haunted her dreams for years. The entire table strained to see what was written there, but only Sophia could read the words that changed everything. To Mark Hale, the man I owe my life to. The signature below was unmistakable. Richard Lane, her father. Sophia's legs gave out, and she collapsed back into her chair. The color drained from her face as memories flooded back. Fragments of a night she had tried so hard to forget. Rain, twisted metal, her father's voice calling for help, and another voice, calm and strong, saying, I've got you. You're safe now. Oh my God, she whispered, her voice breaking. The table erupted in confused murmurs. Victoria Chen leaned toward Marcus, whispering urgently, What's happening? Who is this man? But Sophia only had eyes for Mark. With trembling fingers, she reached up and unclasped her silver necklace, the one piece of jewelry she never removed. She held it up to the light, and everyone could see it was actually a locket. 15 years ago, she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. My father and I were in a car accident. Our car went off a bridge during a storm. We should have died. The room was completely silent now. Even the servers had stopped moving. A man jumped into that freezing water, Sophia continued, her eyes locked on Mark's face. He pulled us both out. He saved our lives, and then he disappeared before we could properly thank him. Mark's expression remained calm, but there was something softer in his eyes now. My father searched for months trying to find our rescuer, Sophia went on. He only knew his name was Mark. Before Dad died 5 years ago, He made me promise that if I ever found this man, I would make sure he knew how grateful we were. She opened the locket, revealing a tiny photograph inside, a picture of her as a 12-year-old girl standing next to her father, both of them smiling despite visible bandages and bruises. He gave me this locket, she said, and told me it would help me recognize the man who saved us. He said I would know him by his eyes that had seen darkness but chose to bring light. Marcus Blackwell sputtered, This is incredible. Do you mean to say that this man saved the founder of Lane Enterprises?" Sophia finished. "Saved the man who built this company from nothing. Saved me." The revelation hit the table like a thunderbolt. Phones appeared again, but this time to capture something miraculous rather than cruel. The same people who had mocked Mark minutes earlier now stared at him with a mixture of awe and shame. Victoria Chen was the first to stand, her voice small and mortified. "Mr. Hale, we had no idea. Please accept my deepest apologies." One by one, the other guests began to rise. The assistant who had been humiliated looked up at Mark with tears of gratitude streaming down her face. But Mark's attention was elsewhere. In the corner of the dining room, little Emma had appeared, having wandered from the kitchen area where she had been coloring. She held up a fresh crayon drawing, a simple picture of a man in work clothes standing next to a woman wearing a silver necklace. "Daddy," Emma called out innocently, "I drew you with the pretty lady who has the same necklace I put in my picture." The entire table turned to look at the 7-year-old girl, then back at the drawing, then at Sophia's necklace. The coincidence was impossible to ignore. Sophia looked at the child's artwork and felt her heart skip a beat. In the drawing, the woman's necklace was clearly visible, drawn with surprising accuracy for a child's work. "How did you—" Sophia started to ask, but Emma had already skipped back toward the kitchen. Mark watched his daughter go with a gentle smile, then turned back to face the room full of people who had completely misjudged him. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the most important things in life aren't written in contracts or measured in dollars." The macro spike had hit its peak, but everyone in the room sensed that the biggest revelations were still to come. The dining room buzzed with whispered conversations as the magnitude of the revelation sank in, but not everyone was ready to accept this dramatic turn of events. Marcus Blackwell, his pride wounded and his authority challenged, stood up abruptly. His face was flushed with embarrassment and anger at being made to look foolish in front of the international partners. "Now wait just a minute," he declared, his voice cutting through the amazed murmurs. "This is all very touching, but we're here for business, not fairy tales. Anyone can carry around an old notebook with a signature." The table fell silent again, tension crackling in the air. Mark turned his calm gaze toward Marcus, but said nothing. "I mean, really," Marcus continued, emboldened by what he mistook for weakness. "What proof do we have that this story is even true? This could be some elaborate con game. Old stories don't have any real value in today's world." Victoria Chen shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clearly wanting to distance herself from Marcus's words, but he pressed on. "We're supposed to believe that this maintenance worker is some kind of hero? That he deserves to be treated like royalty because of something that supposedly happened 15 years ago?" The cruel laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Even Marcus's own associates looked embarrassed by his outburst. Mark stepped forward slightly, his voice remaining perfectly calm. "You're right about one thing, Mr. Blackwell. Value isn't measured by old stories." Marcus smirked, thinking he had won the argument. "Value," Mark continued, "is measured by who was willing to risk their life to save the man who built this company, who chose to act when action mattered most." Sophia had been sitting in stunned silence, but now she reached into her purse with trembling hands. She withdrew a leather portfolio, one she carried everywhere but rarely opened. "My father," she said, her voice growing stronger, "left me more than just a company when he died. He left me instructions." She opened the portfolio, revealing several documents in protective sleeves. The top page was clearly visible to everyone at the table. It was a handwritten letter in Richard Lane's distinctive script. "This is his final letter to me," Sophia continued, her eyes scanning the familiar words. "He wrote it just before he passed away. He made me promise to keep it with me always until I found the right moment to read it aloud. Marcus's confidence began to waver. Sophia, surely you're not going to... He wrote, Sophia interrupted, her voice now carrying the full authority of her position. If there ever comes a day when someone questions the worth of Mark Hale, remember this. He placed my life and yours above his own safety, above his own comfort, above any thought of reward or recognition. The room was dead silent. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to listen. Sophia continued reading. The man who saves your life when he has nothing to gain from it. That man belongs to this family forever. He has earned not just our gratitude, but our absolute trust and respect. She looked up from the letter, her eyes meeting Mark's across the table. Mark Hale is worth more than all the business partners and fair weather friends combined. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. The final words hit the table like a physical blow. Marcus Blackwell's face had gone from red to pale white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Victoria Chen stood up slowly, bowing her head toward Mark. Mr. Hale, I owe you a profound apology. We all do. One by one, the other international partners rose from their seats. The German steel magnate, the Japanese electronics CEO, the Australian mining executive, all standing in respect for a man they had dismissed moments before. Marcus remained seated, his hands shaking slightly as he realized the magnitude of his mistake. In attacking Mark, he hadn't just insulted a hero, he had challenged the explicit wishes of Richard Lane, the legendary businessman whose name still commanded respect worldwide. Sophia stood as well, her voice ringing with absolute authority. Let me be crystal clear to everyone in this room. Mark Hale doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. He saved my father. He saved me. And today he saved another innocent person from humiliation. She turned her ice blue gaze to Marcus, who visibly shrank under her stare. Anyone who can't see his worth doesn't deserve to do business with Lane Enterprises. The threat was implicit but clear. Marcus's company stood to lose millions if they were excluded from tonight's deal. Furthermore, Sophia continued, Mr. Hale didn't come here tonight seeking recognition or reward. He came to work. He saw someone being treated unfairly, and he acted, just like he did 15 years ago. The room erupted in applause, genuine this time, filled with respect and admiration, rather than the empty social clapping from earlier. Mark remained perfectly calm throughout the ovation, his hand resting protectively on the assistant's shoulder. When the applause died down, he spoke just 5 words. Some things are worth protecting. Marcus Blackwell gathered his papers with shaking hands and stood to leave, his face burning with shame. As he walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoed loudly in the now reverent silence. The healing had begun, but the most powerful moment was yet to come. The applause gradually faded, leaving the dining room in a reverent quiet. The international partners remained standing, their faces reflecting newfound respect and understanding. But Mark Hale had no interest in basking in their admiration. Without a word, he gently helped the assistant to her feet. She looked up at him, with tears of gratitude streaming down her cheeks, but he simply nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that no thanks were necessary. Mark turned toward the kitchen area where Emma was waiting, her small hand clutching her crayon box. She looked up at him with innocent eyes, completely unaware of the drama that had just unfolded. Ready to go home, sweetheart? He asked softly. Yes, Daddy, Emma replied, slipping her tiny hand into his calloused one. As they walked toward the exit, Mark paused beside Sophia's chair. The billionaire heiress sat frozen, watching him with an expression caught between wonder and desperate hope. Her silver necklace caught the light one final time. From her crayon box, Emma pulled out her latest drawing, the one she had been working on in the kitchen. It showed a man in simple clothes holding hands with a little girl under a bright rainbow. Beside them stood a woman wearing a silver necklace, her crayon-drawn face smiling. Without saying a single word, Mark placed the drawing gently on the table in front of Sophia. Emma looked up at the elegant woman and whispered, You look sad, but in my picture, you're happy. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the simple artwork. The drawing showed something she had almost forgotten how to believe in. Hope, connection, the possibility of healing. When she looked up to respond, Mark and Emma were already walking away. Their footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor as they headed toward the restaurant's exit, leaving behind the world of crystal chandeliers and billion-dollar deals. Sophia watched them go, the crayon drawing trembling in her hands. Tears ran down her cheeks as she studied the child's innocent vision of what could be: a man, a woman, and a little girl, all connected under a rainbow of possibility. The dining room's golden light reflected off the drawing, making the waxy colors seem to glow with life. Sophia sat alone at the head of the table, surrounded by wealth and power, yet feeling more moved by a simple crayon drawing than by all the contracts and business deals in the world. Her silver necklace caught the light one last time as she clutched the artwork to her chest, finally understanding what her father had tried to tell her about the things that truly matter. The story ended not with words, but with the profound silence of a moment that would change everything.